Hey, how's it going? Thanks for offering to help me. I'm currently working in the UE4 blueprints and having a little bit of confusion with the interface variables. Now, this is my interface. It's called the combat interface, and I have the melee attack function, which I've been using for a while, and that works fine. I don't really have any issues with the melee attack function, besides this one thing that I'll get into later. But basically, I wanted to add in a variable, which is a public variable in this interface, so that all of my NPCs and everything else that has this combat thing will have this public variable called health that they could set and get. So I'm referencing it here, and I type in health, and you'll notice that I don't have any health variables here. And while interface does populate the default function here, it doesn't populate like any health variable down here, which I'm kind of surprised by. I'm curious why, if it's showing me the melee attack, it's not showing me that down here. So that was a little confusing, but I do seem to be able to grab the get and set health if I right click here and do that. And so that's what I've done. I've actually set it to 100 at the beginning, and then down here I've when I'm taking damage, I grab it, I subtract the damage, and then I set it again. However, whenever I'm referencing it, I'm constantly getting variable is not in scope. So this is like some sort of error, and occasionally it won't compile either. And so I'm just confused with how this is working, because the events or the functions seem to work really well, because if I can right click on this, I can go to the implementation. Boom, I've got this event, which is called whenever the function happens. However, when I'm referencing this variable, it doesn't seem to work. You know, as you can see, this code seems to compile. However, when I play it, this guy's health is always 0. So that negative 35 there is what that showed me. But basically, it doesn't seem to be changing at all, and it constantly says, like, variable is not in scope. So I could do this all with functions. Like, I could have a delta health function, or I could have a set health function. And this tutorial I was looking at by Matthew Wadstein does something like that, where it's all done through events. However, I'm really not sure why, if the interface can have a variable, I don't seem to be able to reference it anywhere. And if so, how should I do that? Like, for example, the other thing is if I add a function here. So for example, let's say I want to add the set health function, and then I could probably do an event based on that. But then when I come into here, it's going to have a whole bunch of compile errors, and now it's going to say stuff like, oh, you know, the target no longer exists with the self health node. And so I will have to remove the self, and then I add the self back in, and now, at least for this issue, it fixed the compiler, which it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. The main, I think, confusion I have is how, if I just define this set health function, how is it going to compile if I haven't set an implementation for it? So I can choose this. I could say implement function, and then it will pop a new thing on my grid for me. However, if I don't have it implemented, and I fix these compile errors right here, I don't understand why it's compiling, because my whole like understanding of how these interfaces work. So you'll see that it compiled, even though I never implemented the set health. So now I will, but as you can see, if I just delete it, it's still compiling. And I really don't understand that, because the whole idea, my intuition was that the combat interface is like a contract where I'm guaranteeing, hey, you know, this class, the NPC, or this blueprint class, the NPC, is going to implement the set health function. And so if it's not actually implemented, kind of what's going on here? Like, I should have gotten a compile time error because I didn't implement the method I said I would. So that's kind of my first question. And the second question is, how do I use these variables? Because it seems like whenever I reference them, over here it says that the variable's not in scope. So am I supposed to, you know, similar to how you would implement the interface's function, do I somehow implement the interface's variable? So I'm just not sure how that works. So yeah, if I right click this, I say add a variable, and then it pulls me over here. And so, you know, I want this to be the health, but obviously I've created something different here, right? If I just added this health variable, if I get it, this is different than whatever happens when I right click and I say get health from the actual combat instance. Or sorry, the combat interface. And so obviously I know how to, you know, work with a local or even a public variable here if it's inside the scope, but I'm curious why it's not in this scope under the interfaces tab. And if I am supposed to be referencing it correctly, you know, using this sort of like set thing that it gives me right here, then what am I doing wrong with respect to grabbing it? Because it seems like whenever I grab the health variable, it's constantly got this variable not in scope error. So that's kind of what I don't understand. And I'd love your help. Thank you.